All right, finally, spring is here. As I shoot this, it's about 72 degrees. It's the middle of the afternoon in late March. And so now's a great time to talk about how weather affects the completion of asphalt projects. So the number one misconception is that the high ambient temperature for the day is the main consideration with weather affecting project completion. That's not quite true. So we're gonna go ahead and list off 6 other factors that affect the completion of projects. So the second factor affecting project completion is ground temperature. So as I mentioned, it's 72 degrees outside right now. I used one of these infrared guns, which I'm sure everybody's familiar with now, with getting your forehead checked. But we used this to check the ground temperature in the sun. It was 98 degrees, 26 degrees hotter than the ambient air temperature. I also measured it in an area in the shade that's been in the shade all day today, and the ground temperature was a chilly 46 degrees. So you can imagine if you're placing hot asphalt that's maybe 280 degrees on a 45 degree surface, how that cold is just gonna suck the heat right out of the material. Or how if you place seal coat on a very cold surface like that that's in the shade all day, it's just never gonna dry. The third consideration is wind speed. So just as you might blow on your food to help it cool off, or you might blow on something that you've painted to help the paint dry, it's similar with asphalt projects. So if you have a lot of wind on a day when the asphalt is already cooling down quickly, it's just gonna really suck the heat out of that and limit the time that you can compact the asphalt. But for a seal coating project, that can be a great thing, because if we want the material to dry, that breeze blowing across it is just gonna speed the evaporation of the water out of the mixture and help it cure quicker so you can open it to traffic. The fourth factor is sunlight and UV exposure. So again, today, 72 degrees or so. I checked the UV index, it's about a 6 or a 7. In the winter months, it can be a 1 or a 2, even when the sun's out. And in the middle of the summertime, it can be a 9 or a 10. So just as we touched on earlier with the ground temperature, that exposure to sunlight and to UV rays is really gonna significantly heat up the ground temperature and heat up the material. So it's gonna allow longer time for compaction of asphalt, but it's also going to speed up significantly the drying and curing of a seal coat. The fifth factor is the number of hours of the peak temperature for the day. So in many months of the year, we're just touching that peak temperature for a short time period during the day, and then it's dropping off. Whereas in the middle of summer, we might reach a peak temperature that's very high, and it might stay at that temperature for a good 6 to 8 hours. So if we're talking about not only the ambient temperature, but how long it's lasting and how that's affecting the ground temperature and the amount of time that we have for things to cure at that temperature, the number of hours that we're at that temperature becomes very important.
The sixth factor
is the number of hours of daylight that we have. So as you know, in the wintertime, it's getting light very late in the morning and it's getting dark by maybe 5 p.m. Whereas in the summer months here in Northern California, it's not getting dark until around 9 in the evening, and it's light before many of us get up in the morning. So the number of hours of daylight is significantly going to impact how the surface warms up, the ambient air temperature, and how long those temperatures last. And finally, the seventh factor is moisture and rain. Now, humidity isn't so much of an issue here in Northern California in the Bay Area, but it can be on certain days, maybe in the early spring or the late fall. Because seal coat cures by drying and by water evaporating out of an emulsion, the amount of moisture in the air can really play a big part in how quickly that evaporation process can take place. With asphalt placement and compaction, the humidity is really not so much of a factor. But we want to make sure it's certainly not raining during the course of the day, or that it's not misty. Although I will say that even asphalt rollers and grinders that remove the asphalt do have a little bit of water on them for dust control. So a very, very minimal amount of misting or a light rain during the course of a day when asphalt is being placed can be permissible, although we probably should never plan for that. So asphalt essentially cures by cooling from a placement temperature in the high 200s to a cessation temperature, or a temperature at which it can no longer be compacted, of around 150 degrees. So when we take all 7 of these weather factors into consideration, plus other factors such as the travel time that we're transporting materials from a plant or a manufacturing facility to a job site, and then the temperature of those trucks and the tanks and the beds that are carrying those materials, you could see that on a very cold day, a contractor could really quickly lose control of the temperature elements that are so key in getting good quality out of a project. So that wraps up this video. We are going to touch on in future videos some other elements related to temperature of materials and how they relate to quality. So stick around and we'll cover those in a future video.